My name is Geoffrey Bond and I live here in Burgage Manor in Southwell, Nottinghamshire. This was the home of the poet Lord Byron from 1803 to 1808. Byron had unexpectedly inherited the title as the sixth Lord Byron in 1799 and came down from Aberdeen with his mother to Nottinghamshire to Newstead Abbey. But for various reasons, unfortunately, he couldn't live there. So his mother and he went into Nottingham, and after some time Mrs. Byron found this house in Southwell where Byron lived from 1803 to 1808 when he was at Harrow School and Trinity College, Cambridge. Importantly, this house is where Byron wrote his first poetry, assisted by a woman who was like a sister to him across the road, Elizabeth Piggott. And he went to Newark, the local town, to have his books published by Mr. Ridge. One could say that the genesis of Byron's poetry was here at Burgage Manor in Southwell, Nottinghamshire. I'm now sitting in the Byron room in Burgage Manor. This was Byron's bedroom, and I've turned it into the Byron room with my collection of books by and about Byron. It was here, I believe, that Byron wrote some of his poetry. The first edition, for example, of Fugitive Pieces, which he wrote for his friends, published in late 1806, and then another privately published book, Poems on Various Occasions. And thirdly, for public dissemination and for the public to purchase, a series of poems called Hours of Idleness in 1807. On all of these volumes he received the help of Elizabeth Piggott across the road, who, as I've said, was rather like an elder sister to him. Here's a silhouette of her as a young woman, and we have a fine portrait of Elizabeth in later life when she was about 40 in 1828. Not only did Byron write his poetry here, but of course he went out into Southwell town, he got involved in the local community, and for example, writing here to the Earl of Clare, he says, "My time has been much occupied with very different pursuits, performing in private theatricals, publishing a volume of poems at the request of friends for their perusal, making love, and taking physic. The last two amusements have not had the best effect in the world, for my attention has been divided among so many fair damsels, and the drugs I swallow of such variety in their composition, that between Venus and Aesculapius I'm harassed to death." This was a young man writing of 19. Byron became one of the best-known letter writers in the Romantic movement. Leslie Marchand has published all his letters in a collected volumes, an amazing person for writing letters. But to come back to the point about the poetry that was written here, which was so important in Byron's early days. Of course he wrote his poetry in other places as well, but essentially he always came back to base here in Southwell. One treasure that I have that I just want to mention to you is a book of poems by a Portuguese poet called Louis Comenche. And in this book, Byron writes in his own hand, "L'amitié est l'amour sans aile. Friendship is like love without wings." Byron, 1806. And he gave this to Elizabeth across the road. And she wrote in this book her reply, and it's, I suppose, one of the few treasures I have that link the two, Elizabeth Piggott and Byron the poet. But the last point I'd like to make is that Byron's poetry, which went on to conquer the world, he became one of the most famous men in Europe, started here, with no disrespect to Newstead Abbey, where he couldn't go and live for very long. The genesis of Byron's poetry, I believe, was here in Southwell, in Burgage Manor, and going to have it published in Newark-on-Trent. So we must remember the importance of Southwell to Byron and of Burgage Manor.